Right. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Mahrt, Associate Professor of Biology. She grew up near Augusta, Georgia, where she developed a lifelong love of the outdoors, especially reptiles, amphibians, and birds. She earned her bachelor's degree from Augusta College, her master's degree from Southeastern Louisiana University, and her PhD from New Mexico State University in 1995. She's been at Eastern Oregon University since 1995, where she teaches a wide range of biology courses, including Principles of Biology Labs, Introductory Biology, Ecology, and Ornithology. As a population ecologist, she's been studying Columbia spotted frogs for nearly 3 decades, and since 2018 has operated a bird banding station at Ladd Marsh. She shares her life with her husband, Steve, 2 miniature schnauzers, a cat, and a box turtle. She wrote this, and I was very happy to get top billing on that list. I wasn't sure I would go above the dogs, but I did. Her talk today relates to work she did on her sabbatical last year that took her to research stations around the U.S., as well as field stations in Costa Rica and Ecuador. Please welcome Laura Mahrt.
Oops. Thank you. Today I want to share what work I did during my sabbatical, and it really centers around one simple question. How old is this bird? Okay. Why is it going down? Hello? There we go. It just needs to wake up, I think. So how old is this bird? So feathers turn out to be remarkably good storytellers because birds don't replace all their feathers at once. So each feather is going to record a different moment in the bird's life. And if we can read these stories correctly, we can learn about how old the bird is, how it fits in the population. And that matters because age underlines nearly everything that we try to understand about bird populations: their survivorship, their reproduction, and their long-term, oops, I jumped ahead, sorry, and their and any long-term change. So since 2018, as Steve says, I've been reading these feather stories at our long-term map station right there out on Ladd Marsh. And during my sabbatical, I had a chance to take the same question, what stories do the feathers tell me, to banding stations across the Intermountain West, the Midwest, and then I spent 5 months traveling through Latin and Central America. Today I want to share what those feathers have taught me, just not about what the birds are, but what about how we can interpret these biological signals, from very different environments. So we ask the question, you may ask the question, why does age matter? So accurately aging birds is fundamental to their demography. So what is the age structure of that population? We can get good ideas on their survivorship estimates, their productivities. We can make inferences on their life histories. And these are all the goals of MAPS. And MAPS stands for Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship. So we run a MAP station. And you can see here working hard on a very cold, probably late May day. So you may ask the question, why study molt? And molt gives us something uniquely powerful. It's a biological record written directly on the bird. I can look at other parts of the bird, like the skull. Birds have 2 layers of their skull, so when they're a young bird, they have a single layer, and as they mature, they acquire a second layer. So I can look at this layer and I'll know, are you a young bird or an old bird? So that just tells me, are you a young bird or an old bird? I can look at plumage color. That can tell me, are you a young bird or an old bird? I can look at the soft stuff, the brood patch. So if a female has a brood patch, I know that she is breeding, so she would be an adult bird. But molt patterns are very consistent within life stages. And with that power comes assumptions, and that's where this talk goes. So again, you might ask the question, why do birds molt? And at its core, molt is simply just the replacement of feathers. UV light is the #1 breakdown of feathers, but feathers also wear as the bird moves through the landscape. But birds also molt to acquire new plumage so they can be sexy for the girls. And it's all about being sexy for the girls. So when molt happens, how complete is that molt? Which feathers are replaced? All varies with age, species, and region. So we need to talk about 3 basic types of molts that birds have. So the first molt is called the preformative molt. So when baby birds are in the nest, all they are is a little bowl of food, right? And we want to get out of that nest as quick as possible. So to get out of that nest, birds put on juvenile plumage. And juvenile plumage is cheap. And if you look at your handout, I think it says it is Kmart clothes. So it's cheap clothes. Not to say anything bad about Kmart. So it's cheap. These feathers are loose. They're fluffy. They have no undercover. They have no down. They're completely naked underneath. The feathers are streaked or mottled. The feathers are also narrow and shorter than what we see in adults. So you may be familiar with the juvenile robin, nice little mottled. So this is cheap. It gets me out of the nest so I'm no longer prey. But it's not going to get me on my migration because my feathers are not very aerodynamic. It's not going to keep me warm. So birds quickly molt into what's called their formative plumage. And so they do a preformative molt to get there. And so the formative molt, so here's a robin, informative. It looks adult. It's a little better quality, but still it's not the best quality. This is a partial molt, so birds only molt a few of their feathers. But it does get them to be able to migrate and survive the winter. Another molt that birds do, it's called the pre-alternate molt. This brings them into their alternate molt, or their sexy molt, as I like to call them. So this is their, they do this just before breeding. It can occur on the breeding grounds, or it can occur during migration, or before they migrate. So as I said, it is highly variable. This is a partial molt. So they don't molt all their feathers. So here is our western tanager. He's in his winter plumage or his basic plumage. And then he does a partial molt to bring in that beautiful tequila sunrise and be that lovely western tanager that we all love. So that's the alternate molt. The last molt is the pre-basic molt. And this molt is a complete molt. So when a bird goes through basic molt, they replace everything. They replace all their body feathers and their flight feathers. And this occurs after breeding season. So, and it brings them into basic plumage or winter plumage. So here we have an American goldfinch molting out of his beautiful lemony yellow plumage, getting his very drab winter basic plumage. Now some birds, like chickadees, are always in a basic plumage. They don't have an alternate plumage, so they're always in a basic plumage. Okay, so you got formative, alternate, basic. You got those down? Okay, we're good. So, before I go any further, we need to look at feather tracks, because we've got to track these feathers as they are being molted. These are the feathers that we look at while we have a bird in hand. So when we're at the banding table, you want to look quickly. They always say you should be no longer than a minute to have a bird in hand. Process it quickly, let it go. So the first feathers, I'm going to stand over here, we're going to talk about are the primaries. The primaries are flight feathers, and songbirds, passerines have 9, some have 10. They molt from the inner to the outer, and when the first feather molts, they drop it, and they'll start growing in their new feather, and then the next feather will drop and grow when the first feather's about a quarter. The purpose is to try not to make great big huge gaps, so at least the bird can continue to fly. This is a symmetrical molt, so it means that what's happening on the left wing is also happening on the right wing. Covering the primaries are the primary coverts. They have the same number as the primaries. They follow the same molt, so one at a time. The purpose of the primary coverts is to give a nice airfoil to help with flight. And again, this is a symmetric molt. So what is happening on one wing happens on the other. The next group of feathers are the secondaries. This is another type of flight feathers, provides some lift to the birds. There are 9 secondary feathers, and that includes these 3 feathers right next to the body, which is called the tertials. They molt in this order, so 1 through 6. Symmetric pattern, what's happening on the one wing happens on the other. But what's really interesting, and this is something I missed my first 4 years of banding, is that I don't look at S8 or tertial number 2, because this is a lot of times the first feather that molts. And we miss that all the time, because we open up the wing, the tertials are close to the body, and we miss that. So look at your tertials. I see some of my banders are in here. The secondary coverts, also called the greater coverts, cover the secondaries, and they can be showy. And these molt all at once, so they'll lose every single one of their greater coverts. And again, this is symmetrical, and the purpose of the greater coverts again is to provide a nice airfoil for the birds to fly. All right. And 3 allulae. So the allulas are small feathers. They are important to provide the bird with a little bit of lift. They usually don't drive aging decisions, but they kind of complete the picture, so the allulas are these. And sometimes birds molt these, and sometimes they don't, so that really helps solidify the age of the bird. Lastly, we have the rectices, the tail feathers. Bird passerines have 12, so 6 on each side. It's a symmetrical molt, so they'll lose the central one, then they'll lose both 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6. But a lot of times birds will drop all their rectices. If they're in the process of doing complete molt while we're banding them, a lot of times birds will lose all their tail feathers in our hands. If a bird like a woodpecker or a wood creeper, they tend to molt R1 last because they use that as their kickstand. And so they need that to be, you know, in good quality. So they'll molt that one last. So that's something that you have to look for if you're banding woodpeckers. All right. So when we look at these molt strategies, species are going to differ widely. Some do one complete molt a year. Other birds do a complete molt and then a partial molt just before breeding season. And so the timing is really important for migration. In seasonal environments like what we live in, these strategies are very predictable. But the problem is this predictability breaks down when we lose the seasonality. So as I traveled to the tropics, I lost my molt strategies. So on your tables, you'll have a handout of Joe Bird, and you can follow along. The one you have is a little bit more detailed than the one I have here. So Joe Bird, this is showing the 3 years of the life of Joe Bird. And this is showing a bird doing one complete molt a year. So as a bander, we use two systems to age birds. We can use the calendar year, and we can also use the molt cycle aging. Calendar year works perfectly in northern hemispheres. It does not work in the tropics at all, but I'll share both with you because at our station, we of course use both. So baby birds, they're not born in January, but so baby birds, they are out and about in June, and if they're baby birds, we call them hatch-year birds because they were born this year, so they're a hatch-year bird. With this calendar aging, all birds celebrate a birthday on January the 1st. So all birds have just had their birthday. And so hatch-year birds become second-year birds. Second-year birds become after-second-year birds. So we can age birds as hatch years, second year, and after second year. And that's pretty much as far as I can go. It's easier to age them based on their molt. So here's my baby bird. He's all in juvenile plumage. Everything is juvenile. Remember, juvenile plumage is loosey-goosey. So it's great to get me out of the nest, but it's not going to get me to migrate or survive the winter if I don't migrate. So baby birds go through their pre-formative molt, and it's a partial molt. So they just molt their body, and they molt their secondary coverts. Body makes me aerodynamic, secondary coverts make me aerodynamic. So it makes perfectly good sense. So they go migrate, they come back. They still look exactly the same because they haven't done a molt. But by now, these guys are pretty trashed because these tail feathers are juvenile, poor quality. The flight feathers are pretty poor, so they are looking pretty ratty. They can breed, and then at the end of breeding season, they do their pre-basic molt, and they molt all their feathers. Now they're all in their basic plumage. This bird can migrate or stay, and I can catch him the next year, and he still is in his basic plumage, and he will just follow this basic plumage forever. If I catch birds in the fall, I don't know if this bird is a second-year bird or an after-second-year bird, so I just call them an after-hatch-year bird because I know this bird is an adult based on molt, but I don't know how old he is. So calendar and molt. But we have another method. And this method is called the WRPs, and y'all have a handout if you want to follow, because there's a lot of writing up here. So WRP stands for wolf, rider, and piles. And so these guys said, you know, people are banding in the tropics. Calendar doesn't work. We can use molt and just say they're informative molt, or they're informative plumage, they're in juvenile plumage, they're in basic plumage, or alternate. But let's make codes, because you know how much fun codes are. So with this coding system, the first letters, it's a 3-letter code, tells me what cycle. So am I in my first cycle, my second cycle, my third cycle, my definitive cycle? I don't know what cycle. It never hurts to say unknown. It's a really hard thing to put down on the piece of paper, I have discovered. The second code tells me whether or not that bird is molting. So if it's not molt, it's in its cycle. It's a C. If it's molting, it's in its pre-formative, pre-alternate, pre-basic. That's what the P stands for. Or I don't know what you're doing. The third code tells me what plumage the bird happens to be in. Is it in its juvenile plumage? Is it in its formative plumage? Is it in its alternate or basic? So these really help really solidify the molt. We can also use adjunct code, so we can say, well, I'm not really sure, but at a minimum it's doing this, or I know it's a hatchier bird, or I know that it's an adult bird. So we have these cool codes. So if we go back to Joe Bird and we apply the WRPs. So baby bird in full juvenile plumage is in its first cycle, not molting, juvenile plumage. It goes through its molt, and it's in its first cycle, not molting, in its formative. So we call it an FCF. So that tells me right away what the plumage is that the bird is in. I can give it an adjunct code and say it's a hatchier, because when I catch this bird in June, he looks exactly the same. He has exactly the same code because he's still in formative plumage, but I give him an A to say, this now it's an adult. When it molts this first time, now it's in its second cycle, molting into its basic, and now it's in its definitive basic. And then he stays in his definitive basic plumage till the ends of days. So WRPs work really well. And as I traveled, I went to different banding map stations in the US. They all use the WRPs. But the stations in both Costa Rica and in Ecuador, one of them did not use the WRP, so I was trying to teach them, you know, this is such a better way to age birds. And so I'm going to try. Here is Joe Bird with alternate plumage. So you remember the Western Tanager getting his sexy on. So again, juvenile bird molts into formative, migrates. While he's coming back, he's molting into his alternate plumage. So this bird is a really interesting bird because he has juvenile, formative, and alternate plumage all at the same time. So we call him an FCA because he's still in his first cycle. And he will molt and get into his winter plumage, migrate, come back, molt into his alternate plumage. So then here he is as a DCA. Okay, I know I threw a lot at you, but stay with me. All right. So we band, there's a couple of banders here, a map station. It's under the umbrella of the Institute of Bird Population. So we all use standardized mist netting protocols. And we are looking at bird demographics, so survivorship, productivity recruitment trends. And we can look at these across breeding different stations. There's about 1,200 map stations in the US and Canada. At our map station, we run 8 nest nets, so we're pretty small. We open at sunrise. We keep the nets open for 6 hours. We check the nets every 30 minutes. We collect a ton of data: age, sex, skull, reproductive status, fat, body molt, wing length, wing molt, and get weight. Plus, we put a band on the bird. We band 7 times throughout the summer, and we band roughly every 10 days. Here's an aerial of our station. Just to give you an idea where we are, we're along Ladd Creek. Over here is Pierce Road. This way is Hot Lake Road. So that's where we are. So when I age birds in Eastern Oregon, and of course when I looked at birds in the Intermountain West, those stations that I visited, we have really strong seasonalities. We have clear breeding season and pretty much textbook molt patterns. And so I really have developed the confidence of what a second-year bird looks like. So look at this Western tanager. He's a second-year bird. Even though he doesn't have his wings open, look at his alula. Look, it's brown compared to how black his secondary coverts are. So he didn't molt that. So I know he's a second-year bird. So I have good confidence in what my birds are. So let's look at a couple of birds from Eastern Oregon. So common yellowthroats. This is the most common bird that we capture at our station. And the molt limits are very clear and easy to see. So this is a great example of a second-year bird. He doesn't have a really jet black mask. His white isn't all that clear. His tail feathers are pretty ratty because this guy flew to, where do they fly to? Costa Rica, and back again, and he has juvenile tail feathers, so they're pretty ratty. But this is the key. Look at the greater coverts compared to the primary coverts or the secondary coves. There's a distinct color difference that we see here. So this is telling me my bird is this. He's a first-year alternate bird. His secondary coves are formative. His primary coves are juveniles. His tail is juvenile, but he's an alternate plumage. Easy, right? You can all do this. If we compare that to an after second-year male, so again, look at his face. Beautiful black face mask, clear white. The tail's not as ratty, but notice the difference between the greater coves, or the secondary coverts, and the primaries. They're pretty much the same color. So this tells me this is this bird right here. He's a DCA. Easy. Anybody can do this. Right, Zoe? Yep. Zoe's been banding with me, what, 2 years now. So. So here's the scenario we all love. Warblers are great. Look at this guy. You can see that the primary coverts are very different than the secondary, and this is a little hatchier bird in his formative compared to a lovely second-year male who's in his alternate. So nice and clear. Warblers are really great about that. But so are buntings. Buntings are sweet. So here's lazuli bunting, which is another very commonly caught bird. Here's the second-year male. The after second-year male, notice the coverts have the same tinge of blue. And he's all in his sexy, and I love this second-year male. We just caught him this season. So look at him. He replaced his turds, because those are blue. those secondaries. But notice all of his, rest of his secondary flight feathers and primaries, he didn't replace. He replaced these primary coverts, but didn't replace these. So he did the absolute bare minimum for alternate plumage. So think about it. If you're a bird and you close your wing, what's going to be seen? These first primaries and all these secondaries. So the stuff in the middle is just noise and it's invisible. So the girls won't see it. So I just do the best that I can because I'm a second-year male. But I had so much fun when we caught that bird. What I find is the hardest is brown birds, the LBJs. Song sparrows, we catch a lot of song sparrows, and I struggle. I've been banding for 8 years, and I still struggle with song sparrows. They're just tough because they're brown on brown. But I have to look at other things, so I have to look at tail. So young birds, tails are very different than older birds, and older birds will have a slight buffiness there that we don't see there. But it's pretty subtle, and it's really hard. Ask Zoe. It's really hard. Ask Mike. Mike, it's pretty hard. Okay, so my key question on sabbatical, so do these aging rules that I'm comfortable with in Eastern Oregon, do they work other places? So in the Intermountain West, I was catching the same kind of birds, but in Minnesota and Michigan, I was catching these gorgeous birds, and you know, the patterns felt familiar. There were some subtle differences on timing, but the feather wear, everything was what I was used to. And I had to convince myself not to get distracted by the purdiness, because, you know, I'd get, oh, look at this bird, so, you know, because, you know, these are new birds that I haven't held before, and so I would get excited. So this lovely chestnut-sided warbler, I got duped a couple of times by second-year males because they would be so gorgeous, and I go, oh, DCA, and then I open the wing and I go, oh, no, FCA. And like this American redstart, he's gorgeous, but if you notice his wings, the flight feathers are not the same color as the rest of him, so he's not as black. So that's a good giveaway that he is still wearing some formative and some juvenile plumage. So things worked out pretty well. I felt very comfortable. Then I traveled to South America. I was in the Andean Choco Mountains. I visited 2 research stations. So the Reservas Las Tangaras was the first station. These are remote stations. And you can see how thick the forest was. This is a net run, so that's a net. I banded in 3 different locations. I banded in December. In the Andes, they don't have like a wet season and a dry season. They have a wet season and a wetter season. So December was the beginning of the wetter season. And kind of high in elevation. It was really quite chilly. And I also banded in the Un Poco del Choco, because it's a little part of the Choco. And I banded there in February, which is the height of their rainy season. And it's a little bit lower in elevation. So if you get a feel for how thick the forest was. Nicole she runs the station. She's really afraid of snakes, so she makes us rake the net run so we can see snakes. And then I get distracted by snakes. Ooh, look, snake. So it was a hard job. So in Ecuador, I have a completely different molt universe. I have non-seasonal environment. I have wet season, wetter season. Temperature's pretty much consistent. I found out that I had extended and multiple molts, and the age classes just started to blur. I had to rely more on feather wear and color and shape and look for molt limits. I had a lot of pitfalls. I made a lot of errors. I misidentified feather generations, and I was trying to assume North American norms. So let's look at some of the birds that I caught there. Good old Swainson's thrush. I felt very confident with the Swainson's thrush in hand. Though we don't catch them at our station, I have handled lots of Swainson's thrushes. And so it was a familiar face in a tropical place. And so Swainson's thrushes all go to Ecuador. That's where they spend their winter. And how you tell a hatchier bird, a juvenile, from an adult is you look at P10. So they have 10 primaries. P10 is greatly reduced. This is P10 right here. It looks like a covert. So in young birds, P10 is as long as the coverts and it's wide. In adult birds that have done their first pre-basic molts, P10 is much shorter and thinner. So I was taught in Minnesota, this is what they said. P10, is it a butter knife or is P10 a stabby knife? And so we would sit at the tables and we'd have Swainson's thrushes and we'd go, do you have a butter knife or a stabby knife? And so banders we're a little odd sometimes. But it's an easy way, and again, because this is a brown on brown bird, and so you have your little codes. But let's look at some cool Ecuador birds. So we have this uniform ant shrike, a lovely little bird, and he or she, I don't remember the sex, but this bird is in full formative plumage. Look how loosey-goosey these feathers are. The tail is pretty pointy and ratty, and there's really no color, the color differences. You can see that this is all just great formative. So I felt comfortable with ant shrikes. Ecuadorian thrushes, a thrush. So they work just like our American robins. The young birds, the juveniles, are all splotchy, and they look like a thrush. Nice, juvenile, all plumage. This bird has not molted into the formative plumage. So I felt confidence with this guy. Then I caught an adult Ecuadorian thrush. Look at this. These are new. It's an active molt. These are old, but these are even older. What was this bird doing? It has so many generations of feathers, and it's not following the proper protocol, because you're supposed to do P1 to P10, and then S1 to S9. And this bird did S4 out. These were previous and these are old. So I said, well, at minimum, I think he's in his second pre-basic molt, but I don't know. Just maybe you, PB, because, but this was a typical story that I started to find with these birds in Ecuador. Again, here's Zeldon's ant bird. And again, this bird has molted all of these, but these are still juvenile. Why are they retaining? Nobody could answer my questions, but this seems to be the case that we're seeing. I felt comfortable just saying that this bird was in an unknown cycle in basic plumage. But it was an adult bird, but it's not forming to North American norms. And this one is, of course, my favorite, because this little scaly-breasted wren has so much going on. And this one even confused Nicole, who teaches WRP. She had no idea what to call this bird. So these are new, these are new, these are old, but you start looking at the coverts. These are old, this is new, that's old, that's old, that's new, that's old, that's new. What was this bird doing? I have no idea what they're doing in the tropics. And there's not that much information. So I didn't have a bird in hand in the photographer's pose, but I did take a picture of it while it was sitting out as we released it. So, yes, they do. They have no tail at all. Nope. There's his tail right there. That's all that the tail is. Yeah, no tail. So, and of course, this lovely ant shrike is doing the same thing that we saw in lazuli bunting. So this felt kind of comfortable. So these are new, these are old, these are new, those are new, those are old, those are new. So again, when I close my wing, I got the sexy on just so the girls can see it. So this one felt familiar. This was a nice molt pattern, and I saw this one pretty regularly there too. So I don't know. So gotta go back. Let's see. So stepping back from all these examples, my big takeaway is, yes, molt is a very powerful tool in seasonal systems. In like the temperate North America, molt aging works really well. But what my sabbatical highlighted for me is that molt is also deeply context dependent. Geography, the climate, the seasonality, all this shapes on how and whether clear molt patterns emerge. In my tropical systems, age classes blur, molts become extended, they're incomplete, they're poorly synchronized, and many of the rules that I have just don't apply to these birds. The limitation isn't molt itself, it's assuming that the same interpretive framework works everywhere. So you may ask why this matters beyond my aging codes. Well, it matters because aging isn't just about assigning the right code in the field. Aging feeds directly into my demography models, my survivorship, my productivity, my recruitment, and any of these small biases can scale up into big interpretive errors later on. So programs like MAPS here in North America, we're very consistent on how we apply the aging criteria. But just as important as, and this is just as important as the standardized net effort. But more broadly, molt tells us something about the life history trade-offs. When a bird molts, how completely it molts, and why they delay or skip reflects how they balance their survival, their reproduction, and their movement. So understanding molt more deeply helps us understand birds not just as data points, but as organisms responding to their environments. So think about a bird in the tropics can breed any month. Birds in North America, we gotta do our stuff in June and July and get the hell out of Dodge by September. We gotta do all of our molting, do that. Take care of all of our babies. In the tropics, birds will breed the entire year, but they have very small clutches. So they'll breed, they'll molt, but they'll pause their molt because maybe conditions are really good and I can breed again. So I think that's what we're seeing in the feathers. They start, they stop, I breed, I start again, I breed, I start again. So it's a quite neat little scenario. So For me personally, this sabbatical changed how I think about birds in hand. What story are you telling me? I don't know. So working across all these different ecosystems forced me to slow down, question all my assumptions. It questioned everything that I knew. And I had to get really comfortable with being uncertain, especially because the data just didn't fit into those existing categories of Joe Bird. So moving forward, I see real opportunities to strengthen the collaborations between map stations and other international banding efforts. I'm heading back to Ecuador in August for another couple of weeks of banding. I'm taking an EOU student with me, so I'm real excited about that. We'll be there during the wet season instead of the wetter season, so I'm really curious how the molt patterns are going to change. And so in these tropical systems, in particular, they highlight how much we don't know. So lucky for us in North America, we have this book written by Peter Piles. This has molt information on every single North American bird. I don't have this in the tropics. If I have any questions, I can read about molt, I can read about what they look like at different age, I can look about their sex, I can look about everything. I don't have that when I'm in the tropics. So the more I can learn by stepping outside of my comfort levels, the better. So ultimately, molt doesn't just tell us how to age birds, it gives us a window into how birds live their lives. So before I answer questions, I really have to acknowledge all the people and organizations that made all this work possible. I have to thank Steve for supporting me early mornings, 3:30 in the morning, and supporting me while I ditched him for 5 months as I traveled through Latin America. Of course, EOU gave me sabbaticals and summer stipend. The Marsh providing us a place to band, all the different banding stations, and I couldn't do this without my MAPS crew, and I am deeply grateful for all the hard work and expertise that they do. So that brings us to the last slide, and we come back. How old is this bird? So we started with this guy. How old is he? Any guesses? He has a crest, so we know he's an adult. Okay, so we can at least say he's an adult bird. I know I don't show you the wing of him, but this was a DCB, so a definitive bird in his basic plumage. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank our speaker, first of all.
I'm going to take off these glasses.
Any questions?
Yeah. Okay.
So, in the temperate zone at least, you've got, do you need it to be on?
For the people at home.
Okay. In the temperate zone, at least, you've got a really good way for telling whether the bird is age 1, 2, or 3.
Right, right.
Is there, and obviously, molt patterns in plumage aren't getting you past year 3. Do you have ways of seeing about years beyond that?
The only way is to band the bird as a hatch-year bird. And if you band that bird as a hatch-year bird, you can follow it. We do have one common yellowthroat that we banded in 2017 during we had a workshop, and it has shown up. So I know that it's at least 8 years old. Woodpeckers you can age. Gulls you can age to different years. Hawks you can age to different years. But passerines, you're pretty much limited to hatch year, second year, after hatch year, after second year. But that's the great thing about putting a band on them, because then you can follow them. So we do get good numbers of recaptures out at our station. So it's always fun to see another familiar face.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
Everybody's all confused.
Yeah,
Zoe
Zoe.
has one for me.
So with the molt patterns all over the place for the Ecuador, Costa Rica birds, what could you do? Were you just doing, I assume you could still kind of tell juveniles?
Right, we can still skull them.
Okay, yeah.
So sculling helped a whole lot. It was very helpful if they were in juvenile plumage.
Because they're still all loosey-goosey and, or
There's
some of them had different juvenile plumages?
yes.
Okay.
So juvenile plumage was easy. Formative plumage was harder. But again, you can look at that color difference. But the skull was a good way, and a lot of tropical but the problem with skulls is a lot of tropical birds never completely fuse their skull.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it made it really, there was usually some little spot right here.
Okay.
And so that made it really hard.
Yeah.
But it was nice if the soft parts, so if they had a brood patch or a cloacal protuberance, so I could
Yeah,
at
so
least
you could
tell
still
that they
do,
were
first
breeding.
year versus
Yeah.
second year or older, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
okay.
so it was pretty hard.
Yeah.
And of course, some birds, they're moving through that very thick forest, so they're in really ratty shape. It's raining. They have mites and ticks, and I had one with bot flies on it. It was so gross. And so they have mites. And so I think sometimes those weird patterns that I see is maybe they had a really bad parasite load and they just dumped what they could and just kept moving. And so
Yeah, I did notice like that one toucanet, it looked like it had a really trash tail.
yeah, all the little ant birds, the birds that follow the army ants, they are just trash because they're just walking through the
Gotcha. So you could have an adult bird, not just a second year bird that's got really awful looking.
yeah, and
feathers.
that threw me a couple of times.
yeah.
And so luckily the folks running the stations at the Reserva, Dusty helped a whole lot, and the Ecuadorians could let me know when I was failing, and and I failed a lot. I felt like, oh my goodness, I'm never gonna. But then the question is, well, how many of these birds have you held in your hand before? And that's why I'm so confident with common yellowthroats, because we've caught. I looked it up. We've caught 600 yellowthroats of the 2,800 captures. We have caught a lot of common yellowthroats out there. So, and so that confidence builds with handling the birds.
We probably have time for one more question, if there is one.
Anybody else? And of course, we are always looking for new volunteers. We always need a good scribe and good extractors and good banders.
Sort of on a light note. So, you're catching birds that have already been banded. Do you ever catch somebody that you recognized as having been banded here down there?
That's a great question. So a couple of years ago, we caught a bird that was banded at a migratory station in Colorado, and she showed up here. And so we caught somebody else's bird, so that was pretty cool. Nicole and Dusty, since they get all these Swainson's thrushes at their stations in Ecuador, nobody in North America has ever caught one of their birds. But those birds return, and she has lots of recaptures of the same Swainson's thrush. So they're just going to some place in North America that nobody has a banding station, I guess. Because you got to think about it. That bird has to crash into your mist net. So Nicole's never had anybody report one of her birds, or Dusty. What's really neat is Dusty's and Nicole's station are in the mountains, the same mountain range, but as the crow flies, it's about 40 miles, but you have to drive like 100 miles to get there. It's a long ways away. But Dusty banded a mannequin, and Nicole caught her mannequin at her station. So we know that we get some movements across, but it's pretty rare to catch somebody else's bird. Too many birds. Birds have very much, what now? What? Yeah, it's too big of a landscape, but also birds have such tight sight fidelity. They come back to the same place again. We've banded hatch-year common yellowthroats, and then we catch them again the next year, and they come back and breed here. So this is their spot. That's why I want to start doing motus. Motus are the small little tags they ping off of towers, and that way you can get a better feel of movement of birds across the landscape. So. Yes. Some of them will ping off as cell phone towers, but you can have your own motus antenna. And we have a motus antenna out on Ladd Marsh. You can go to the motus site and look at all the birds that are pinging off of the Ladd Marsh station as they're flying by. Right now it's, the last time I checked, it was a whole bunch of woodpeckers that have been pinging off. So, and I was at the Hawkwat station in Costa Rica, and they have a motus tower there. And so every couple of days they would download all the data to see what birds were coming by and pinging off the station. Gives us some cool movement information. Anybody else?
All right, well, let's thank our speaker again.
All right, thank you. Thank you again for coming.